and welcome back to Season 6 of the MRX Lab podcast, the show from FlexMR, where this year we're on a mission to share with you inspiring stories, tips and tricks to help you put customers at the heart of decisions. To help me do that, I'm thrilled to be joined today by Jane Callingham, BBC Brand Director. Welcome to the show, Jane.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to start off, if that's all right, just asking a bit about audiences at the BBC. What do you do to go about putting audiences at the heart of things at the BBC?
Well, it's a good question. I think audiences are fundamentally important to the BBC. They always have been. So when the BBC was founded, a lot of people aren't aware of this, but when the BBC was founded, it was founded as a commercial organisation. But one of the guys, the main guy who set up the BBC, he was called Lord Reith. He actually felt that at the time it was founded as a radio organisation because obviously television hadn't been invented, and he could really see what the power of radio could be. So he decided that rather than it being a commercial entity, it would serve a better purpose as a public good. So he thought that it could be used to really disseminate information in a way that was positive and helpful to, as he said, the people of our great nations. And so audiences were always at the heart of what the BBC has done, and that's still the case today. We're really fortunate that we've got a really, really good audience research team who are in the organisation. And they basically produce insight and data that informs every point of the creative development process, actually. So from brief inception, when you're thinking of coming up with a format, through to creative testing of a format or of the marketing for a format. Once it goes out, if something's broadcast or if it's dropped on iPlayer, we then have all of the viewing figures kind of consolidated on a 28-day basis because overnight figures aren't the thing anymore. And then once it's gone out, we sometimes look and do sort of deep dives into particular issues that have been covered, or if there's something that people want to see different in the next series, etc., etc. So we're really lucky that audiences are always at the heart of everything we do, and we have a great team that informs our audience understanding at every point in the process.
You mentioned there the ownership structure of the BBC. It's obviously not a commercial organisation at the moment. Do you think that changes the way that audiences are involved? Do you think it's more difficult? Do you think it's easier to not?
It's a really good question. I'm slightly spooked by the fact you said yet. It's not a commercial organisation yet. I hope you don't know something that you know something I don't. I think it absolutely changes it because I think we have in the UK there are 70 million people. There are around 29 million households. Most of those households do need a TV licence. So if you're watching live TV of any description, whether or not it's on the BBC, even if it's live TV, live football on Amazon, you would need a TV licence. So as a result, we have a huge audience. We have a huge number of people that we need to feel are getting value for money from the BBC. And so I think in terms of our attitude towards the people that pay for us, I think we are, at the heart of what we do, we have a strategy of universality. So we're trying to make sure that everybody gets value from the BBC at some point. And I think that in order to do that and to drive that, you do need to consistently be in touch with your audience. I think a lot of marketers have a product and they go, how can I sell this to a group of people? I think what we do is we say, we need to understand people in order to develop what's important for them.
That's a really interesting point, actually, that you sort of did think of it that way around. But is it harder to get people to think about audiences because because you said everyone's got a TV licence, so there's no sort of commercial need to drive revenue? Do you think that changes?
No, I don't actually, because the way that the BBC is measured and judged is by people's willingness to pay the licence fee. So we exist by right of Royal Charter, which is negotiated every sort of 10 to 11 years. That's a negotiation that happens with government, where we agree what the BBC is there to do and what it's going to deliver over the coming period. There are a few metrics that are paid attention to disproportionately in that process. So one of the things that certainly historically governments have been interested in are how many people are using the BBC, are they glad it exists, and are they willing to pay for it? And if people don't say they're willing to pay for it, then we wouldn't exist. So although we don't have a sort of commercial bottom line, the way that I always think about it is our equivalent of a profit margin, or our equivalent of the commercial bottom line, is really public approval. Because if we don't have that, we won't exist in the future. And that means, again, you have to constantly understand what matters to people and show up in a way that's valuable to them.
I know you were at the Customer Salience Summit yesterday, which you did a fantastic closing keynote for us. And during the day, people did talk about words and language.
Oh, yeah.
And at one point, I think, Judy, I think it was in one of the presentations, talked about the word customer.
Yes.
And I've noticed you're using the word audiences here.
Yeah.
What's your take on, do you think you should be using the word customer, or what, I mean, talk to me about language.
We have a lot of conversations about whether or not we have customers, and whether or not if we change the language within the organisation from audiences to customer, would it make us more commercially minded? Because, you know, ultimately we do need to be operating, I guess, more like a commercial business, because the landscape in which we operate has become so much more noisy and competitive. Customer just doesn't feel right, and I think customer, I don't know, I mean, with the licence fee, people don't really choose to pay it. If you're watching live television, you have to pay it. It's not a choice in the same way that if you're a customer of Starbucks, you can choose to go there and buy a Starbucks coffee rather than another. So customer doesn't feel quite right. Sometimes I feel more comfortable with consumer. I hate the word, but I think it's a more accurate description of, you know, people are consuming our content. They're watching, they're listening, they're reading.
Yeah.
And for me, that's ultimately what it's all about. That's where the value is. So for me, if I had to change it from audience, which I agree does feel quite sort of passive, I would probably go with consumer rather than customer.
And thinking about yesterday's presentation, what do you think your key message that you're trying to communicate, or if somebody wanted to take a key takeaway from it, what would it be?
It was really interesting, because when I was preparing for the summit, I was thinking about how important audiences are, and I think it's very easy to state these things, and actually they're not. But when I was thinking about it, I was like, gosh, audiences really are at the heart of everything we do at the BBC. And I think that one of the things I talked about at the summit was, I think the trick now is to go from understanding who your audiences are and what they do. It's about now involving them and encouraging participation in order to kind of really engage and connect with audiences. And I think for me, that's something that is quite close to my heart at the moment, which is how do we go from sort of passive understanding of individual behaviours or groups of people that can be, you know, we can sometimes talk about people in quite reductive ways when we talk about customers or audiences. How do we actually go from that sort of slightly distant relationship to one of much greater connection, where those people are genuinely involved in the creation of what we do? So for me, I think that's something all businesses, all strong brands need to at least give people a sense that they're involved in what they do. Just
unpack that a bit for me. When you say participation or participatory, what are you meaning in there? What's the difference between that and a sort of brand-centric way of thinking of, you know, it's a communication process?
Well, I think participation is a spectrum. So I think at one level you can participate with a brand because you're actively invited in to do something. Mm-hmm. So please come and answer this survey, or, you know, something like that. I think also, though, I think it's about giving audiences a sense of accessibility and ownership of the brand. I think that showing up as a participative brand is as much in the language you use as what you do. So I think being accessible, speaking the language of audiences, they all help you feel open. They make people want to connect with you. And then you might want to kind of build different activities on top of that actually in real life give people an opportunity to get involved with what you do. And, you know, IKEA are a brand that have done that brilliantly, I think, with a lot of the stunts and events that they've done. They had their famously, they had their big sort of IKEA sleepover. And I sort of think, I mean, when I heard about it, I was like, who would go and want to sleep over in IKEA? Like, but people love it, you know, and it's a way of really experiencing a brand. And I think that experience, that in real life experience is becoming more and more important.
It's very interesting, because I made a point, I think, in my opening piece about the influence of customers and it's sort of rising. And we've gone from sort of brand-centric to customer-centric, mm-hmm. where it's about the experience of the product.
Yeah.
But I also sort of cast my mind forward into the future, and you're sort of seeing the fact that values, people expect a brand and a product to align to them, which is quite a difficult thing for a company or an organisation to think through, because that sort of seems to be at a different level to, I'm just going to produce something. that they're going to enjoy?
I mean, I think the best brands have always done that, actually. I think it's just that we're more aware of it now and it becomes more of a conscious thing. I think, and when you were sort of talking about, is it customer-centric, is it brand-centric? Well, brands are everything you do. So I think sometimes people think brands are the responsibility of the marketing department, and they're really not. You know, brands are the product that you have, the way you speak. They're the people that work within an organisation. All of those are potential touch points with the brand. I think, you know, we live in a world where people have accessibility to brands in a way that they never had before. They can communicate directly with them. I think that just means that as a brand in 2025, you've kind of got to be on point all the time with everything you do, because you can't sort of stay behind closed doors and then decide when you're going to talk to the people that are buying from you. You have to be conversing with them and in their lives all of the time. There's so much noise, there's so much competition. If you're not there with the people that you want to engage with, like at all of their key moments, every step of the way, it becomes really difficult, and people will just move on to the next organisation or brand if you're not top of mind.
It seems to me, as we talk about that though, that from an insight, customer insight, which is where I sort of sit, from that perspective, we almost need to change the way we're also asking questions, because we often ask about a product, we ask for your expectations, your needs, and then we'll try and design something to match that. But what you're talking about seems to be something greater than that.
I think it has to be. I think, you know, and we've fallen foul of it in the past as well. We are very good at going out to our audiences and asking them to tell us what they think about us. And actually, I think that what we all need to be doing now is really going out and understanding how people are living, what's important to them, what matters to them, where are the points where we could engage with them. We need to understand how we can meaningfully show up in their lives in a way that feels valuable, rather than, as I said, sort of trying to tell them what we want them to know about us. I think it's a complete reversal in that relationship.
Yes, so in that, if you look at it from a relationship perspective, I need to step away from the product and the service to some extent. Obviously, you're going to need to understand that experience as well, but I also need to understand you as a human.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's a life experience.
I think that's right.
From the summit yesterday, I think Elliot Saga sort of did a session which was all about Debbie 64, you know, bringing to life an individual and showing us how she did that over a period of time. Which, for me, it begins to feel more humanistic. We're trying to build an understanding of someone as a human being, not just their experience as an NPS score and a customer satisfaction sort of feedback.
Yes.
Did that resonate with you, or do you think it's, again, going further than that?
It did resonate with me, but I also have a particular... I get really annoyed with pen portraits. And I know that wasn't a pen portrait.
I was going to say it wasn't a pen portrait.
It was an actual description
person.
of an actual person. But I think sometimes, you know, it's really different. When in an organisation that's got a lot of customers or a lot of audiences like the BBC has, it's really easy to get quite reductive quite quickly, because you can't know everybody as an individual. So you've got to kind of group people together. And actually, I understand that there's often a desire to do that. But I think that you really, I mean, it does, of course it helps when you're to sort of paint a picture to a certain degree. If you think you can sum up your customer in one paragraph, I think you're probably going to miss quite a lot of the stuff you really need to know about what's going on. So I think you can look at demographics, you can look at socio-demographics, you can look at life stage, and of course those things are going to give you an indication. But I love research like ethnography or deprivation research, where you really get under the skin of what somebody thinks and feels about something, because that's where you really unlock what people believe.
But going back to Ellie's point, I mean, it was a human, it wasn't a pen portrait. So yes, it wasn't ethnography, we weren't living with them, it was through the research community and a series of video outtakes, essentially, to understand over a period of time how they live.
Yeah.
The pen portraits, I completely see your point and where you're coming from. But as a communication exercise, if you've got an organisation of the size of the BBC and we've got an audience base of the size of 70 million, how do I communicate and understand people's lives when they are all so different? Yeah,
I think that's fair. I think I was really interested in what Charlotte talked about, Charlotte Vickery, yesterday, because I thought that was just brilliant. When she gave the example of British Gas and, you know, kind of getting the CEO to go into a customer's house, and, you know, she made the point that within the first minute, they knew more about their customer base than they ever would have known through any PowerPoint presentation.
Yes.
You know, they could see the stack of bills on the side. They could feel the temperature in the house, and that they, you know, she clearly wasn't, you know,
Yes.
switching her heating on. I think those are the things that's the level of understanding and authenticity that you want to understand about your audiences. So of course we all have to a certain degree, paint a picture if you're trying to disseminate to a large group of people, or you've got a large group of people you're trying to characterise. You have to sort of default a little bit to the pen portrait. But I think sometimes we should challenge ourselves, not think that we therefore know who it is. You know, when people make up, oh, her name's Karen and she lives in, I hate it. I absolutely hate it.
I guess at that point, that's the point, isn't it? There's a balancing act
Yes.
where the pen portrait becomes unauthentic because we've characterised it.
Yeah.
It is a characterisation rather than here's 5 people who are similar, and let's look at their real lives and their real names and and really open up that. I guess that's the difference you're talking to there, the authenticity of that versus the characterisation.
There is something a bit judgy as well about pen portraits, you know, and even yesterday I kind of felt it, you know, Debbie, she likes a hot tub, and everyone goes, she likes a hot tub. These are people, you know, they're real people, we're real people. I think it's just understanding that who people are as proper humans, not just by the things they do and like, you know. It's about really understanding why they think the way that they do, and I think that's where you start to unlock real insight that you can then lean into to really engage and connect with an audience.
Do you think that humanisation, as I probably characterise it, is more important now than before in an AI world, data-driven world? The reduction point I just come back to, we reduce everything to numbers if we're not careful, which is where Ellie's jumping off point was.
Yes.
Do you think it's more important?
I agree that we are in danger of reducing everything to numbers. I was talking to my old boss a few months ago, and he said he started out life at Diageo, and he said, you know, when he was talking to his old CEO, his CEO said, I used to get sort of 2 pages of data every month, and I knew exactly what was going on with all of my brands and my business. I now get 30 pages every day, and I've got no idea what's happening. And I think that's the danger, isn't it? It's like you can drown in data. And actually, you know, but data isn't insight, we know that. It tells you about behaviour. I mean, it's really helpful in that sense, but it doesn't tell you why, I don't think. It doesn't go deeper. And when you're creating a brand and you're really trying to build an emotional connection with somebody, you need to know more. But yeah, I mean, I feel like there is a real danger that we live in a world where we pay attention to the things that it's easiest to measure. But just because you can't measure something doesn't mean it isn't true, you know. And so I think we need to get better at measuring things like impact in social and stuff like that. I think we use very surface level metrics to understand what's going on, and every platform does it differently. Is it half a second for a view through, or, I mean, what is that all about? I just think we've got to get hold of that, because I sort of feel like it's a world that's running away from us. And yeah, I think there's a real danger that we settle for poor quality data in a world that we're all trying to understand, and it runs away from us a bit too quickly. So I think that's on all of us to kind of lean into that space a bit.
It is. It also reminds me of, I think it was Julia's presentation yesterday, the customer drift presentation. The bit that stood out for me when she talked about leadership rituals, for example, where the CEO actually used the product on a regular basis.
Oh yeah, the blah blah car.
And the blah blah car one. But also the switch in their whole marketing presence from, I think, value and price to connection.
Yes.
Which really wasn't their proposition.
I know, and sometimes this is where I remember the first time somebody told me about Airbnb, and I thought, who was going to use this? Who's going to go and stay in someone else's house? Like, and then you realise that the world shifts and expectations are different and benchmarks are different, and suddenly it's a completely normal thing to do. And I think it is really, Mark Ritson talks about it a lot, doesn't he? He's like, you're not the customer. And I think sometimes that's what we all have to remember. It's hard because you spend so much time thinking about your customers and feeling like you know them. You think you can think like them, but actually that's a really slippery slope. Like you do always need to check reality, I think. Which
I think was the switch she was making, you know, as a startup, it understood its proposition, it understood what it was trying to do, it saw a gap in the market, but then cleverly was able to connect and understand the customer in that human way, and made a switch in its proposition that more mirrored actual use and behaviour, I
Yeah,
guess.
and I think her point as well was they already had insight in one territory in Europe, but actually it was different in Latin America. And so being able to nuance like that, I think, is really important as well. We talk about it quite a lot. You know, if you look at political parties now, they don't really have one strategy. You know, they've got 10 for different people, different groups within the population. I think that as a society, we're all very different now. Like we all, it's very well documented that things are fragmenting quite a lot. The fact that, you know, someone is ultimately massively famous to a 15-year-old and they've got 300 million followers and I've never heard their name. It really frightens me because I'm like, what? I don't understand. How do we operate in this world? But the idea that you can approach everything with the same approach, it no longer rings true. And I think that's what Yulia was saying, which was that actually they couldn't have exactly the same proposition in all of their territories. You obviously need a brand idea, I would say that, but you need a brand idea that is common. But the way you execute that, the way you translate that to connect with different audiences goes to understanding their motivations and how you can be useful to them.
I think you make a really good point there about different strategies. You can't just have one strategy. Again, that reductive point almost is risk. To have several strategies allows you to cover different customer groups and different customer lives in different ways, which I think is a really good way that the brand can connect in different places. I guess that comes back to the BBC. It must ring true for yourself. I mean, you oversee a lot of different brands within it that are trying to connect to very, very different audiences.
Yeah, and actually, you know, within the BBC's portfolio, there are certain things that we know connect with more audiences than others. I think what becomes more challenging and what I spend a lot of my time on is thinking, how can you make the BBC as the coordinating force relevant to everyone? And how does the BBC get attribution back for all of these things it does that are maybe targeted to different groups of people? That's where it becomes really tough. Because trying to be universally relevant while staying meaningful and not blanding yourself out is really tough.
And how do you do that through the different brands? Is that how you balance it? As in, you've got the umbrella brand of the BBC, and then you've got the different channels, radios, and iPlayer.
Yeah, we have a brand architecture model which we're looking at the moment, actually, because it's always evolving as the landscape evolves. And so we have, like, there's the BBC, which is effectively what I would call the parent brand, and everything needs to drive back to the BBC because that's the level at which conversations about the TV licence are had. So, you know, we need to make sure that the BBC is always given credit as the creator brand for everything we do. We then have a series of sort of services and platforms. So we have services like news, which confusingly is both a genre and a destination. So you can get the news on telly or you can go to the news online. And sport's the same. And then we have sort of modes of consuming. So things like BBC iPlayer, where you go to watch something, BBC Sounds, where you go to listen to something. And then underneath that, you've got all of the content titles. And actually, you know, from a brand point of view, we sort of, depending on where you are in the model, you're either a branded house or a house of brands. We sort of have a hybrid model, like a lot of big matrixed organisations do. But yes, what we try to do is make sure that within the portfolio, because the BBC is for everyone, we try to make sure that within the portfolio there is something for everyone. But that's not the same as trying to make sure that everything we do is for everyone, because that's when you go wrong.
Yes. So in that sense, the different brands do speak to different audiences.
Yeah, of course.
That's how
of course.
That's how you.
Different brands, you know, will have appeal to different audiences. The way that we will publicise them will be on different platforms in different media channels to reach different audiences. Because, you know, we're seeing such a huge split now between the audiences that will watch in what we would call linear television. So, switching on the television and just passively see what comes at you versus going to iPlayer or going to a streaming service. You know, young audiences, the television is something their nan has in the corner of the room. It's just not a behaviour that they are generally familiar with. You know, they are very familiar with screens, but the idea of a box in the corner of the room that you sit down and you watch, that's not their behaviour. Their mental models of finding content and consuming content is completely different to older audiences.
So just to sort of bring this to a sort of conclusion around that, there's an interesting point there. How has that changed the BBC and the culture of the BBC? Because what you're talking there is a very, very different model to just, I would imagine, 15 years ago.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, we're in a period of immense transformation. You know, as my boss talks about it, he says it's like you're trying to build the plane while you're flying it. It is that you're trying to retain your heartland audiences that are still coming to linear or analog platforms, and you're trying to reinvent yourself to be relevant to younger audiences who are, I mean, really consume so much short form, and we're not in the business of we haven't historically been in the business of short form. That's kind of what young audiences are consuming most of.
Yeah.
So I think it's, you know, it's a challenge, but I think we've survived for over 100 years, and I'd like to think that, again, going back to where we started with the help of our audiences team, really understanding what matters to people, it can help us understand how to show up, and hopefully it will sustain us for the future.
Well, I think that's an excellent point to end on, Jane. So thank you very much for joining me today.
You're welcome.
Thank you to the audience too for tuning in. We may be out of time today, but we'll be back next month with another episode and more inspiring stories of how to put customer insight at the heart of your success. Until then, I've been your host, Paul Hudson, and this has been the MRX Lab podcast.